So good morning, everybody, and also on my side, thank you very much, Philippe, and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you here this morning on this World Soil Day, and also to be able to attend this conference where I learned a lot from. I'm not a soil ecologist, I'm not a soil biodiversity scientist, so I really learned a lot here. My name is Delbaere, indeed. I work for the European Centre for Nature Conservation, ECNC, and in that respect, I'm a bit of the odd one in this group, I think, a stakeholder, whatever that means. ECNC, my organization, is an NGO, is an organization that focuses on science policy and science society interaction for biodiversity in Europe. We work a lot with biodiversity policies in Europe, trying to bring the policy to science and to practice, and trying to, the other way around, bring science to policy and from practice to policy as well. When I was invited to join the stakeholder forum of Ecofinders a number of years ago, I gladly accepted. Again, this was Philippe inviting me. I accepted because, again, being part in a stakeholder forum, in a subject that touches upon what we do in ECNC, but really not is our key topic. Hence the title of my presentation, Going Underground. For me, it went really into a subject area that was pretty new to me. And being on the stakeholder forum, actually, I was asked to represent one of the networks that ECNC is leading, which is this ELNFEB acronym over there, the European Learning Network on Functional Agrobiodiversity. This network is about trying to share knowledge about functional agrobiodiversity, or FAB, which is the ecosystem services offered by biodiversity components in the support to sustainable agriculture. So it's not purely what agriculture can mean to biodiversity, but also the other way around, how biodiversity can support sustainable agriculture. And an important component besides field margins for pollination or pest control is soil biodiversity. Hence the reason why I'm here. At the same time, I'm involved currently in a European research project called Openness, also an FP7 project, a framework program project. Openness is about operationalizing ecosystem services and natural capital. Again, this trying to bring the knowledge from a wide group of experts in Europe and globally to practice, to turn the knowledge on ecosystem services and natural capital into practice. So again, this was about stakeholders. So yeah, that made me think of who actually do I represent as a stakeholder? What is that, a stakeholder? Often when we talk about stakeholders, we refer to they and them, but actually when being on such stakeholder forum, I thought, okay, but who actually am I? Hence that. So what I will do is share a bit of my life with you, if you don't mind. When I was a child, there would always be a small schoolmate who would eat earthworms or other kind of small animals. These would be the kind of the daredevils, and I think girls would kind of scream "eek" and "yak," and secretly they would also kind of look up to these guys because they were pretty daring. I didn't eat earthworms. I think I felt sorry for them, and maybe I wasn't daring enough. But then later, when in primary school, I had this teacher who had a great influence on my life. Although at the time I didn't realize it that much. He was a pretty loud and strict teacher, but he had a great passion. There we have it, a passion for nature. He was the type of teacher that took us outdoors and that would bring us with the class and listen to bird songs and identify plants in the wild, in nature. In urban nature perhaps, but in nature. And in his class he also had this terrarium, nice glass box in which he would keep small, lively mice. And there was a dark layer of, I think, sand and leaves in there, pretty wide, so you could see through the glass and see the mice in there running around in the tunnels. So he demonstrated actually the interaction between above ground and below ground, looking at it afterwards. So he visualized that. Then the results of that teacher's influence was that I wanted to become a biologist, or at least to study nature. And this is what I then did later on when I was a teenager. I started to become really interested in nature. Starting off with tropical aquaria, I went on my first camp with a nature organization, and I fell in love. I fell in love with bird watching. The camp was on a small island somewhere in the Wadden Sea in the Netherlands. And on this small island we saw thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of small little waders. They all looked pretty familiar for me at the beginning. It was a pretty impressive sight, and they were kind of on mud flats on this Wadden Island. We were sitting on the dike with our telescopes for hours and hours, not just watching the nice scenery and trying to identify the species, but also we would do some kind of experiments. We would follow individual birds and try to analyze the frequency of them running around and picking in the mud and taking out a lugworm or something else. And then we would also go into the mud flat and quickly turn upside down a bit of the soil and find zillions of creatures in there. No names, but all kinds of food for these birds and for all other kinds of animals. So again, a very intriguing component under the soil there. At the time, I wasn't too sure whether I would become a biologist or an artist, because I'm interested in visual arts and I like drawing and painting, and I still do that, and I find plenty of inspiration in nature. Usually it's plants and birds and butterflies, kind of the more iconic or emblematic species, landscapes once in a while. But meanwhile, I know there's a lot of undiscovered territory for me to kind of be inspired about. When browsing through this big book that many of you received here, the European Atlas of Soil Biodiversity, I was amazed by the stunning pictures of really photogenic small minimal mites and other microbiota. And I think this is very inspiring for these animals to, all kind of biota, to become a subject for any of my drawings at some point. And I had an example here, but it's not coming up. So yeah, then finally I made my decision and went to university to become a vegetation ecologist. It's a wide open door, that vegetation. There we have him. I think, meanwhile, this is the pop star of this conference and maybe of soil biodiversity. We've seen it in many slides and many books, and I think it's not only nice to see and inspiring for art, perhaps, but I think it was Ladislav Miko who said, "Soil biota can be cute." Isn't he right? I think this is amazing. I think it's a tardigrade, a word I learned meanwhile while being in this. So I wanted to become a vegetation ecologist. And vegetation ecology at the time, that's about 20-25 years ago that I was studying, was largely about the relation between vegetation and soils and other kind of ecological factors. But what wasn't that prominent at university at the time was that the link with soil biodiversity. We learned about the influence of soil compaction, of moisture, of pH, of what have you, all kind of abiotic factors, but we did not learn about the impact of soil biodiversity. Meanwhile, I think yesterday I changed a bit my viewpoint on that with the presentation of Kate Scow, I think, who said soil is soil biodiversity, is soil biodiversity, and so on. So we did implicitly talk about it, but not explicitly. Soil biodiversity, as we've also seen in the presentation from Richard this morning and from Wim earlier this week, at the time soil biodiversity wasn't very much a topic of science or communication. So what I learned meanwhile in EcoFinders and in the other project is that the living fabric underneath the soil is as important, if not more so, for vegetation than I was aware of. people who know me a little bit do know that I like butterflies. I'm a bit of a lepidopterologist, which is somebody who studies butterflies in a way. I do that as an amateur in my spare time, simply because I like doing it. It's my passion, if you like. And that means that I usually also want to include a photo of a butterfly in my presentations, because it's not the first one. Again, Kate Scow had a butterfly in her presentation yesterday. But this is the Alcon blue, or Phengaris alcon. And I don't just include it because I think it's a very beautiful butterfly, and just for the sake of including it. But because this particular species, just like many other butterfly species, has a direct connection with soil. It's full-grown caterpillars, full-grown, the fourth stage of caterpillars. They attract ants by emitting chemicals that kind of resemble those of ant larvae, which means that the misled ants carry these caterpillars into their nests under the soil and feed these caterpillars with eggs, with ant larvae, with an occasional prey. When the caterpillars then turn into pupae, they are still protected by the ants for the same reason. Somehow they smell very nice. Until the moment they hatch and turn into butterflies. Then they really have to be very fast and escape from the nest in order not to be eaten. So that connection between the soil with the ants and the underground world and the beauty of this butterfly is for me very intriguing. But at the same time also it's very important for site managers, natural site managers, to be aware of these kind of connections when designing site management plans, when designing management practices. It's not just about what is there above ground, about mowing regimes and about cutting and coppicing, but it's also about what is underneath. And for this butterfly species, it's essential that also the ants and the underground biota are protected in order for it to survive. Then, of course, besides the school teacher, very important in the influence of my life, my parents. And my father, for example, he loves gardening, which he also passed on to me. And in the back of his garden, he used to have this plot where there was a nice heap of compost. And he loved this compost. He really thinks it's a great product, not only because it's providing fertility for the garden plants, but also because for him, he's a very religious man. It kind of demonstrated the wonders of God's creatures, what they are capable of. He would kind of he put remains of plants and kitchen waste on top of a heap. You keep it moist enough, you wait a while, you're patient, and then after a while, there would be this dark, smelly soil coming out, which is really a good fertilizer. So he would really say, smell this is fantastic. He wouldn't care about the names of all these species underneath. He wouldn't really be interested in that. But just the fact that was happening in that heap in the back of his garden, and he would kind of have free services from this soil, he was really amazed by. And also that, as a father myself, I try to convey to my children now, although the teenagers are a different interest in a moment. Now, apply iPhone. I don't think I do. I just continue. This is not really important. In my work at ECNC, we work a lot with farmers. The network that I was referring to, European Learning Network on Functional Agrobiodiversity. We try to work with farmers. Oh, there we go. And just like gardeners and I guess also like foresters, the farmers, they have an understanding of the value of soils, and they know what a healthy soil means. Again, referring to yesterday's talks, the life in the soil and the health of the soil is a very important component for farmers. Strikingly though, in a number of presentations and in EcoFinders and in our talks with farmers, we see that they have very little knowledge about soil biodiversity. Meanwhile, again, yesterday I had to change my opinion whether that is wrong or right, because they talk about the same thing, but in different terms perhaps. They talk about the soil life, they talk about soil health rather than soil biodiversity. So does it matter if the grass grows, as Richard said? We know it does matter, and there's a whole kind of story behind this, but farmers have a feeling for what soil biodiversity means without really knowing the full essence of it. So there's a big job to be done to kind of weigh the discourse that actually these farmers are being told by big agribusiness companies that they have to use more pesticides and artificial fertilizers to be able to grow their plants. I think we all know here that this is only one part of the story. There is much more to tell about the life under the soil in support of agricultural production. I will move on a bit. In my work I meet a lot of scientists. There you are. And this is, again, it has been a very privilege for me to be involved in this conference. I'm amazed by the number of people attending this conference, not only I am, about this subject. Working with scientists, well, what I was very amused about, I know about counting butterflies and about counting birds, but what I learned is that also there's people out there counting earthworms and other biota. They lie on a kind of a plank on wheels and go at night with a lamp on their head and go in pastures to count earthworms. I thought that was really amazing. Also the diversity in tunnels of earthworms is something that I learned a lot. So I think at the Eco-Finders conference at the end I said, well, I didn't know anything about soil biodiversity before I started, and I still feel I don't know anything about it because it's so immense, it's so complex, there's so much to learn from it. So yeah, there's a long way to go. In any case, you raised my awareness about it, and therefore also the awareness of my organization and of the networks that we're in about the importance and the value of soil biodiversity. I was going to move to the policymakers, but I skipped that because actually the presentation of Mike Swift covered the influence of science on policy, and we'll have a debate later on which covers part of that as well. But just to mention, as Ladislav Miko said, soil biodiversity is gradually gaining ground in policy. It's mentioned in the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2020. There is reference in the EU 7th Environmental Action Programme. The CBD has covered it, and so on and so on. Now, all of this seems to be about me, but actually it is not about me, it's about me, you, them, everybody. What I hoped that I have conveyed is that these child teachers, bird watchers, artists, and whoever you are, these are some kind of stakeholders. There's no such a thing as the stakeholder, and that's really important if you kind of want to design stakeholder engagement activities and stakeholder involvement activities. It's try to realize who you talk to, who you are yourself. Try to empathize, try to understand a bit the language that they use, again, what we heard from Mike Swift, and in developing any kind of ways to engage with them, either through policy briefs, through a 30-second presentation to Lima, through magazines, journals, and what have you. Be aware of who you talk to, who you talk with, and I think 3 keywords, just to give to you to conclude this, is listen to each other, respect each other's views, both ways, always, and do things jointly. I think for the benefit of soil biodiversity, that is all the key elements. I thank you very much.